On the morning of Tet, the Lunar New Year, Hue was supposed to be quiet. Families had stayed up late, lighting incense and firecrackers. Children had fallen asleep in new clothes, and the city's ancient walls were wrapped in mist and low clouds. For a few brief moments before dawn, all you could hear were temple drums in the citadel, church bells on the south bank, and the crackle of distant fireworks echoing along the perfume river. Then the sounds of celebration were drowned out by something else. The first rockets slammed into the outskirts without warning, their blasts rolling across the sleeping neighborhoods like thunder. Automatic fire stitched through the darkness. At the MACV compound on the south bank, U.S. advisors and Marines were jolted awake by shattering glass and the rattle of incoming rounds. Men stumbled out of their bunks, grabbing helmets and rifles as flares turned the rain into sheets of white light. Orders were shouted through corridors already filling with smoke as they rushed to the sandbag walls. At the city gates, ARVN outposts found themselves under fire from every direction. Tracer rounds ripped across the fog, cutting the silhouettes of defenders out of the night. Radios crackled, then went dead. Some posts were overrun within minutes. Others held on, surrounded and unsure who, if anyone, was coming to help. Inside the citadel on the north bank, other uniforms were on the move. PAVN and Viet Cong soldiers slipped through ancient stone corridors, past courtyards and temples they had memorized from maps and reconnaissance. As the first gray light of dawn seeped over Hue, a new flag climbed the citadel wall and snapped in the wind above the Imperial roofs. In houses across the city, civilians in holiday clothes dropped to the floor, hiding under tables and beds as windows shattered. Televisions went blank. Local radio stations fell silent. Phone lines cut out mid-sentence. In a matter of minutes, Tet and Hue had turned from a holiday into an ambush. How did one of Vietnam's most beautiful cities become the scene of the Tet Offensive's bloodiest urban battle, and why did this fight change the way the world saw the war? To understand Hue on Tet morning, we have to go back to the final months of 1967. In Saigon and Washington, the mood, at least on paper, was cautiously optimistic. American commanders pointed to body counts and charts full of arrows and numbers, arguing that communist forces were being worn down. Briefings spoke of progress, of phases of pacification, and reporters were told there was finally light at the end of the tunnel. The message was simple. The enemy was hurting, and the initiative belonged to the United States and its allies. In the north, the picture looked very different. There, in meeting rooms lit by bare bulbs and kerosene lamps, PAVN and Viet Cong leaders studied the same battlefield and came to a completely different conclusion. They understood that they could not match American firepower head-on forever. Instead, they set out to win somewhere else. In surprise, in shock, and in the minds of people watching the war from afar. The plan they built would strike across almost every major city and town in South Vietnam at the same time, during the single moment when defenses would be the most relaxed. They called it the Tet Offensive. To understand why Tet mattered, you have to understand what it meant to ordinary families. Tet is the Lunar New Year, the biggest holiday of the year. Shops close early, streets fill with flowers, new clothes, and the smell of special dishes cooking in crowded kitchens. Families travel long distances to be together. Houses are scrubbed clean, altars are decorated for ancestors, and old debts are supposed to be settled before the new year begins. Even in the middle of war, Tet was a time when many people believed the guns would at least fall quiet for a few days. South Vietnamese units expected a ceasefire too. Many ARVN soldiers were granted leave to visit home. Commanders relaxed their guard, assuming that enemy units would also want to pause for the holiday. Patrols were reduced. Outposts were manned by fewer men. The war, it seemed, would take a brief breath. Hue, in particular, seemed safe. It was the former imperial capital, a city of emperors' tombs, pagodas, and churches, a cultural and religious heart of Vietnam. It sat away from the political storms of Saigon, known more for its scholars and its quiet streets than for coups and protests. Officially, it was considered a low-priority target. Heavy fighting was expected in border regions and remote provinces, not in the serene, mist-covered city on the Perfume River. But while Hue prepared for the holiday, other preparations were underway in the shadows. In the weeks before Tet, PAVN and Viet Cong units moved steadily closer to the city, slipping down jungle trails and through villages at night. Supplies were cached in graveyards, along riverbanks, and in bamboo groves. Weapons and uniforms were hidden in plain sight inside private homes, behind temple walls, beneath classroom floors in schools and universities. Some fighters entered Hue disguised as civilians, carrying nothing more suspicious than bundles of firewood or bags of rice. Slowly, quietly, a ring tightened around the city. Inside Hue, families swept courtyards, polished ancestral altars, and laid out trays of fruit and candies for visitors. Children practiced New Year greetings. Market stalls sold flowers in red envelopes. On the surface, it was the same Tet rhythm the city had known for generations. But this time, something unseen moved beneath the familiar patterns. As families in Hue cleaned their homes, prepared offerings, and waited for relatives to arrive, thousands of soldiers they could not see were already in position waiting for a different kind of celebration. If you look at Hue from above, the battle starts to make more sense. Spread a map on the table and draw a single line through it. The Perfume River. That slow, winding strip of water cuts the city in two. On the south bank, you have the newer Hue. Wider streets, concrete buildings, government offices, schools, and the MACV compound where U.S. advisors worked and lived. On the north bank, behind high walls and moats, sits the old heart of the city, the Citadel. The Citadel is not just a fort. It is a vast, walled world of its own thick stone ramparts, gates, bastions, courtyards, and the Imperial Palace complex in the center. Around the palace are dense neighborhoods of tile-roofed houses, pagodas, and markets, all squeezed into a maze of alleys and lanes. From the air, it looks orderly. On the ground, it is a labyrinth. Into this city, two very different forces walked with very different expectations. On one side were the PAVN and Viet Cong units assigned specifically to Hue. Their orders were ambitious. Seize both halves of the city, north and south, and hold them long enough to proclaim a new revolutionary authority. Hue was meant to be more than just another battlefield. It was supposed to be a showcase, a place where, during the Tet holiday, the world would see a liberated city under new flags and new slogans. For that, they had trained, infiltrated, and cached weapons for months. On the other side were the ARVN and U.S. forces responsible for Hue's defense. ARVN battalions were posted in and around the city, but they were spread thin, with some officers and soldiers away on Tet leave. Their focus was on maintaining order, not preparing for a massive offensive. The U.S. Marines were based mainly at Phu Bai, just south of Hue, with smaller detachments and advisors inside the city itself. Their mission was security and support, not house-to-house urban warfare in a historic capital. The layout of Hue turned these plans into a deadly trap. The narrow streets, stone walls, and ancient compounds were bad ground for heavy armor, but perfect ground for ambush teams with rockets and rifles. Many of the buildings were sacred temples, churches, and historic homes, places no one wanted to see damaged. And woven through every potential firing position, down every alley and courtyard, were civilians, families, students, monks, priests, officials, and shopkeepers. There was no clear separation between frontline and backyard. Hue was never meant to be a battlefield. But once both sides were inside its walls, There was no easy way out, only
never
forward,
meant to be a
street
battlefield.
by street. Tet morning in Hue did not begin with a single explosion. It began with many, almost all at once. In the gray hour, just before sunrise, on the 31st of January 1968, rockets and mortars came in on pre-plotted targets around the city. ARVN positions at the gates, police stations, and small bases were suddenly hit from multiple directions. Windows blew in. Sirens that were meant for fires and floods screamed over the sound of incoming rounds. Under that cover, PAVN and Viet Cong forces moved. On the outskirts, columns of troops slipped out of tree lines and graveyards, crossing fields they had walked and memorized in the dark. Inside the city, teams that had been hiding in safe houses and cellars pulled weapons from caches, rifles from under floorboards, ammunition from beneath altar tables, uniforms from bundles that had looked like ordinary laundry just hours before. They moved fast toward their targets. One group hit the radio station, storming through shattered doors and silencing the morning broadcasts. Another seized district administrative offices and police headquarters. Others headed straight for the bridges and key intersections, setting up machine guns and blocking traffic with commandeered vehicles. Across the river, inside the Citadel, units that had infiltrated earlier in civilian clothes now reappeared in uniform. They overran guard posts, forced their way into compounds, and pushed toward the Imperial Palace and major government buildings. Those ARVN soldiers who were caught unprepared were quickly disarmed or scattered. As dawn finally broke, the new reality rose with it. On the Citadel's ancient walls, new flags were hoisted and snapped in the river wind. Loudspeakers crackled to life, carrying voices that declared Hue liberated and urged people to stay indoors and follow instructions from revolutionary committees. For many ARVN positions, the shock was devastating. Some outposts had lost their officers overnight. Others found their lines of communication cut, radios dead, and runners unable to get through. Under heavy fire and surrounded, a few positions surrendered early. Others held on, with small groups of soldiers firing from sandbagged corners and shattered windows, unsure if anyone still controlled the city beyond what they could see from their own street. Civilians tried to make sense of the chaos in the only ways they could. In some neighborhoods, priests opened the doors of churches for people fleeing gunfire, and pagodas became makeshift shelters. Classrooms, where the blackboards still carried lessons from the last school day, were suddenly crowded with families huddling on the floor. In other areas, residents woke up to find new armed men at every corner, directing traffic, searching houses, and painting revolutionary slogans on walls. On the South Bank, the battle took on a different shape. The MAC-V compound, where U.S. advisors and Marines had been caught in the opening blasts, became a small island under siege. From behind sandbags and hastily reinforced walls, they returned fire at attackers moving through nearby streets and alleys. Artillery boomed in the distance, but visibility was poor. Low clouds and the morning rain turned the city into a maze of steam and smoke. Inside, radio rooms filled with maps and ringing telephones. Messages went out in strained voices. Reports were confused, fragmented. Enemy flags on the Citadel, fighting across the city. ARVN units falling back or cut off. Phrases like "under heavy attack" and "situation unclear" repeated again and again. At higher headquarters, someone finally put it into words. Hue may be largely in enemy hands. Meanwhile, inside the parts of the city they controlled, PAVN and Viet Cong cadres moved quickly to turn military gains into political control. Temporary people's committees were declared in captured districts. Loudspeakers and posters announced the formation of revolutionary authorities. Officials, policemen, and others on prepared lists were ordered to report or were taken from their homes by armed teams who already knew their names and addresses. Some residents lined the streets watching, unsure whether to cheer, stay silent, or close their doors. Reactions were mixed and deeply personal. Some locals, especially those who had suffered under previous governments, welcomed the new forces and their promises of change. Others were terrified, afraid of being denounced, swept up, or hit by stray fire if the government and Americans counterattacked. Many simply tried to survive the day without choosing a side, hoping the front lines would pass them by. By the end of Tet Day, the map of Hue had been completely redrawn. On one block, ARVN soldiers still held a corner and a church tower. On the next, PAVN and Viet Cong units ran checkpoints under new flags. The MACV compound stood like a small fortress on the south bank, while most of the citadel, with its ancient roofs and courtyards, now answered to different orders. Hue was no longer one city. It was a patchwork of streets controlled by different flags, different uniforms, and different futures. For the commanders outside Ho, the first report sounded almost unbelievable. A major city, the former imperial capital, largely in enemy hands. Flags on the citadel walls, government buildings seized, a U.S. compound under siege. For a brief moment, there was confusion. Then the orders went out. Hue had to be taken back. In the rain and low clouds south of the city, U.S. Marine battalions began to move. Convoys rolled out from Fubai, headlights dimmed, engines growling as they pushed along Highway 1. The road that tourists would one day take to see ancient temples and beaches had become a narrow corridor into a city on fire. It was not a clean approach. Snipers watched from tree lines and village houses, firing when they saw silhouettes in truck beds or the profile of a driver through a cracked windshield. Mortar rounds fell on the column, sending men diving into ditches filled with mud and water. Medevac helicopters tried to come in, but low cloud ceilings and heavy fire made every landing dangerous. The closer the Marines came to Hue, the more it felt like driving into a storm. When they finally reached the outskirts, they found a city that refused to fit into their training manuals. The first pushes into South Hue did not go well. Marines tried to advance along main streets, using tanks and armored vehicles as moving shields. Almost immediately, they were hit from above and from both sides. Fire came from windows, balconies, rooftops, even holes blasted through internal walls. Each intersection was a potential crossfire, each open space a killing ground. It didn't take long to realize that walking straight down the streets was a good way to get cut down, so the tactics changed. Instead of marching openly, Marines began to move through the city literally. Teams used explosives and engineering tools to blast mouse holes through the walls of adjoining houses, passing from room to room under cover, rather than stepping out into open intersections. They climbed over courtyards, broke through interior doors, and kicked down stairwells, trading the risk of snipers in the open for the claustrophobic danger of close-range firefights inside people's homes. They found family photos still hanging on cracked walls, altars knocked sideways by concussions, meals left half-eaten on tables. In many houses, civilian belongings and combat gear lay almost on top of each other. Signs that the battle had crashed straight into daily life. Armor did what it could in those tight streets. Tanks and Ontos vehicles, small tracked platforms loaded with recoilless rifles, edged forward carefully, using their guns to blast confirmed enemy positions in upper floors and bunkers. Sometimes they were so close to the buildings they fired on that masonry, and roof tiles rained down over their own crews. Supporting artillery and aircraft were called in where possible, but the same things that made Hue beautiful, its dense neighborhoods, its temples and churches, its historic structures made it incredibly hard to hit the enemy without hitting everything else. The Perfume River made things even more complicated. Every bridge across it was an obvious target, and both sides knew it. To move fully against the Citadel, relief forces needed secure crossings. But as Marines and ARVN units tried to reach and hold those spans, they found them covered by carefully sighted fire from the opposite bank. Machine guns and rockets raked any movement on the bridge decks. In some cases, sections of bridges were blown out entirely, leaving twisted steel and broken concrete jutting into the water. Engineers and infantry worked together under fire to improvise solutions. Temporary crossings, pontoons, and ferries were used where possible. Men sprinted across exposed gaps one by one, bent low, with water and bullets snapping below their boots. Each crossing was its own miniature battle. One more obstacle in a fight that already seemed to multiply challenges at every turn. Meanwhile, on the north bank, a slower, grinding battle was building inside the Citadel. After days of brutal fighting in the south, attention and effort shifted more and more toward retaking this ancient fortress. ARVN units, fighting on home soil in a city many of them knew from childhood, pushed through outer neighborhoods, house by house, and courtyard by courtyard. Beside them, elements of the U.S. Marines joined the advance, adding their weight to assaults on entrenched PAVN positions. The Citadel's beauty became part of the nightmare. Massive stone walls that had once protected emperors now protected machine gun nests and bunkers. Walled gardens, once quiet, turned into temporary strongpoints. Even the layout of the Imperial Palace, grounds, pavilions, gates, and reflecting pools offered cover and concealment to defenders who knew the terrain. Both sides fought hard for meters, not miles. Defenders used prepared positions, interlocking fields of fire, and knowledge of local angles and alleys. Attackers used grenades, satchel charges, and direct fire support from tanks wherever there was space to bring them up. The rain and mist mixed with dust and smoke, turning the air into a heavy, choking haze that made each day feel like it blended into the next. At first, there were strict orders from higher command about preserving the city's historical structures. Hue was too important, too symbolic, to be casually damaged. Fire support was to be controlled, airstrikes limited, heavy weapons used with restraint. Those orders ran into a hard reality. Defenders who would not leave, who had turned sacred and historic spaces into strongholds. As the days went by and resistance remained stubborn, the rules began to bend. Artillery was called in closer. Airstrikes were approved on targets that, in peacetime, would have been untouchable. Tanks fired point blank into thick walls that had stood for generations. Bit by bit, the structures of the Citadel and the surrounding neighborhoods were chipped away, shattered, or set on fire. For Marines and ARVN soldiers, the battle became a test of endurance as much as tactics. Sleep came in short, broken stretches. Meals were hurried, eaten in corners between bursts of fire. Clothes stayed wet for days in the cold, clinging rain. Every doorway could hide a rifle barrel. Every seemingly empty room could contain a booby trap or a team waiting in silence. The faces of comrades killed or wounded in one street were still fresh in memory when the next street had to be taken. For PAVN and Viet Cong fighters, the situation was just as brutal in reverse. They had taken most of the city in a surprise blow, but now they faced a relentless push backed by armor, artillery, and air power. Positions that had seemed secure in the first days were slowly isolated. Strong points that once dominated intersections became lonely islands under constant pressure. Yet many held on, obeying orders to defend as long as possible, to turn every block into a delay and every building into a symbol of resistance. In military reports, commanders talked about progress, about seizing key objectives, about clearing operations. On the ground, progress did not feel like arrows moving across a map. It felt like dragging exhausted bodies one more house forward. It felt like trading ancient stone and human lives for a few meters of ruined street. Every meter gained in Hue cost time, lives, and pieces of the city itself. By the time one side pulled down the other side's flag over a neighborhood or a gate, there were whole blocks where there was nothing left to fight over. When the last shots finally faded in Hue, the silence did not feel peaceful. It felt hollow. The battle had lasted not hours, but weeks. By the time the final positions were cleared and the last communist units slipped away or were destroyed, much of the city no longer looked like the place people remembered from before Tet. Streets that had once been lined with trees and shop fronts were reduced to broken walls and blackened shells. Courtyards were full of rubble instead of children. Roofs were peeled back, windows were open holes, and whole blocks of homes seemed to have been erased. Before and after photographs showed the change in brutal simplicity. A church with its tall steeple and stained glass, then the same building with its roof collapsed and its walls scarred by shell impacts. A row of townhouses along a busy street, then the same row with only fragments of walls standing like broken teeth. Inside the citadel, ancient gates and pavilions bore fresh wounds, cracks, missing stones, scorch marks where fire had licked along carved beams that had stood for generations. When families came back to these places, many did not find houses. They found outlines, foundations, burned doorways, the slightest hints of where their living rooms or bedrooms had once been. Some dug through the rubble, searching for anything they could salvage. A photograph, a cooking pot, a piece of furniture that could still be used. Others stood for a long time in the middle of what had been their home, as if trying to see the rooms in their memory superimposed over the ruins in front of them. The damage was not only to buildings, the cost in lives was high on every side. PAVN and Viet Cong units that had entered Hue with full strength left, with only fragments of their original numbers, those who withdrew, those who were captured, and those who never made it out. ARVN units. And U.S. Marines paid heavily as well. Companies were reduced to half strength or less by the end of the fight. Medics, chaplains, and burial details worked constantly, often without enough time or materials to do the work as they would have wished. For civilians, the toll was even harder to count. During and after the battle, as the smoke cleared and control shifted, the people of Hue began to search for the missing. Relatives who had been taken away during house-to-house sweeps. Officials and policemen who had vanished when the city fell. Teachers, priests, monks, and others who had been named on lists by the new revolutionary committees. Rumors spread of hasty executions, of reprisals, of people marched out of the city and never seen alive again. In the weeks and months that followed, mass graves were discovered in and around Hue. Shallow pits and fields, along riverbanks, in secluded areas outside the built-up neighborhoods. Teams exhumed bodies and tried to identify them where they could. Many of those found were officials, policemen, and others associated with the previous government. Others were civilians caught in political purges, retaliation, or simple misjudgment in the chaos of shifting control. The exact numbers and reasons would be argued over for decades. But the families who came to those sites were not counting statistics. They were counting brothers, fathers, mothers, and children. At the same time, the images of Hue were traveling far beyond Vietnam. Television cameras and still photographers captured Marines and ARVN soldiers fighting through streets that looked like scenes from World War II. They filmed blocks of devastation and interviewed civilians standing in the ruins of their homes. Those pictures reached living rooms in the United States and around the world. Viewers who had been told that the war was being won now saw a major city in flames, with enemy flags that had flown there for weeks. Across South Vietnam, the Tet Offensive had been, in many places, a military setback for the communist side. Many attacks failed to hold their objectives. Casualties were heavy, but politically and psychologically, the effect was entirely different. Hue became one of the clearest examples of that contradiction, a place where U.S. and South Vietnamese forces ultimately retook the ground, yet lost something far harder to measure: confidence, credibility, and the belief that the war could be contained. For the people of Hue, the battle did not end when the last shot was fired. It lingered in the empty chairs at dinner tables, in the ruins of temples and houses, and in the scars that never showed up on any casualty report. Today, If you walk through Hue, it is hard to imagine what this city once sounded like. Motorbikes hum across the bridges where Marines and ARVN soldiers once crawled under fire. Tourists pose for photos at the Citadel gates, where flags changed hands and orders were shouted through smoke. Students cross the perfume river on their way to class, glancing up only briefly at the walls that still carry faint scars from 1968. But if you look closely, the past is still here, in quiet corners of the Citadel. Veterans from different sides sometimes return gray hair, careful steps, eyes tracking lines of walls they once fought along blind. Some lay incense at small altars, others stand in silence, touching stone and trying to match today's peaceful courtyards with the chaos locked in their memories. Outside the city, families visit graves and memorials, both official and improvised. Names on markers, names in notebooks, names that exist only in stories told at dinner tables. For them, the Battle of Hue is not a chapter in a history book. It is the reason someone did not come home, or came home changed forever. Hue became a symbol of the asterisk. Asterisk Tet. Offensive asterisk asterisk. Itself. Surprise on a holiday. A city turned into a maze of fire, and a result that could be called a military success for one side, yet a political shock that shook the other to its core. It showed how an urban battle, fought street by street and house by house, always drags civilians into the crossfire and leaves wounds that last long after the maps are redrawn. But in the end, how this story lives on is not decided only by generals, governments, or historians. It is also decided by you. If your family lived through Tet, through Hue, or through any part of the Vietnam War, if you are a veteran, a child or grandchild of refugees, or simply someone trying to understand what happened here, asterisk asterisk. What does the Battle of Hue mean to you? Asterisk asterisk. Do you see it as a military victory, a political turning point, a tragedy for civilians, or all of those at once? Tell us in the comments below. Share the stories you were told, the questions you still have, or the lessons you think the world should not forget. And if you want more detailed, scene-by-scene documentaries like this, about the Tet Offensive, Khe Sanh, the Air War, and the final battles of the Vietnam War, then asterisk asterisk subscribe to Vietnam War footage right now, asterisk asterisk, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode. If you know someone whose family lived this history, asterisk asterisk, share this film with them. Asterisk asterisk. The guns in Hue fell silent decades ago. But as long as we remember what happened here and keep talking about it, the story and the people inside it are never completely gone.
As long as we remember what happened here